Hi everyone, and welcome to our lecture on Salman Rushdie's novel Midnight's Children. This lecture will cover week 6 and 7 of the course because we're continuing on with the novel next week in class. I'll start with a bit of biographical information about Rushdie just to sort of situate the novel in its context. Rushdie was born on June 19, 1947, which is pretty darn close to the August 15, 1947 birth date of both India as an independent nation and of Salim Sinai, Rushdie's protagonist. He was born in Bombay, which is now Mumbai, into an upper-middle-class Muslim Kashmiri family. So even from this little excerpt, we can see that there are some obvious autobiographical resonances in the novel, as there have been in many of our previous texts, and it might be interesting for us to interrogate why that might be the case. Rushdie was educated as a child in India, and for college he went to Cambridge, where he took a history degree. After college, he began working as a copywriter for ad agencies, and he wrote Midnight's Children while still copywriting. Midnight's Children was the second novel that Rushdie had published. His first, Grimus, was largely ignored, but Midnight's Children was a huge critical success. The novel won the 1981 Booker Prize, and then in 1993 and 2008, it won the Best of the Booker's prizes for the best novel to have received the prize during the award's first 25 and first 40 years, respectively. It's been said by many to be one of the great books of the last century. Rushdie has written many other novels, most of them about the Indian subcontinent and/or the connections and disruptions between Eastern and Western worlds, and he's received many other literary prizes. But he's perhaps most famous or most infamous for his book The Satanic Verses, which was published in 1988. The Satanic Verses is based in part on the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and its subject matter sparked controversy among some Muslims who accused Rushdie of blasphemy. The Iranian supreme leader at the time, Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a fatwa against Rushdie in 1989, calling for Rushdie and his publishers and translators to be killed on sight for their insults against Islam. Rushdie went into hiding for a time and lived under police protection, narrowly avoiding a few assassination attempts, and there were several attacks, a few fatal, on his publishers and translators in the early 1990s. So don't ever let anyone tell you that literature doesn't matter or that books have no weight in the world. Writing can get you killed, as we see here. Rushdie has in fact recently published a memoir about this period called Joseph Anton, which was the alias that he used while in hiding. Joseph after Joseph Conrad and Anton after Anton Chekhov, two writers to whom Rushdie feels a special affinity. Now we might ask ourselves, what unites Rushdie and Conrad, who seem like very different authors, right? But perhaps, like Conrad, who was a Pole living in England who wrote in his third language, Rushdie has long felt like an outsider in his Western-dominated literary milieu. And it might be sort of interesting to pursue this question a little bit further. Why would Rushdie be interested in Conrad's work? Why would he feel a kind of affinity for Conrad? In any case, Rushdie has since published several more successful novels, including The Ground Beneath Her Feet, which came out in 1999, and Shalimar the Clown, which came out in 2005, along with short stories, essays, works of literary criticism, and even some books of children's lit. He's a very prolific writer. Ironically enough, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2007 for services to literature, and he's currently serving a 5-year term as Distinguished Writer in Residence at Emory University. All told, Rushdie is widely regarded as one of post-colonial literature's most influential writers and critics, and no post-colonial course would be complete without him. So with that said, let me give you a little bit of historical context for the novel itself. Now, the novel covers Indian history from around 1915, which is when Adam Aziz, Salim's grandfather, is a young man just returned to Kashmir from his medical education in Germany, to nearly right up to 1980 when Rushdie was writing the novel. So it's quite expansive, temporally speaking. It focuses primarily, though, on post-independence India and Pakistan, with Salim's birth coming right at the moment of India's independence from Britain, and on the after effects of the British partition of India and Pakistan that we've already been talking about in relation to Deepa Mehta's Earth. The novel follows the events of Selim's life as they seem either to parallel, to influence, or to be influenced by national history. And this sort of strange and interesting confluence of character and nation is something that we'll talk more about together as we read the novel. In any case, as such, the novel covers the following timeline and documents the following events. So first of all, as I said, with Selim's birth, it comes at the moment of India's freedom from the British Raj, at the moment of India's independence, which is in 1947. Of course, again, as we already know, between 1947 and 1948, hundreds of thousands, even up to 1 million, die in widespread communal bloodshed after partition on the subcontinent. In 1948, and we see this in the novel, Mahatma Gandhi is assassinated by a Hindu nationalist who disapproved of his peacemaking overtures towards Muslims. And that's a relatively pivotal event for some characters in the book, as we'll see. In 1948, India goes to war with Pakistan over the disputed territory of Kashmir. Again, this is important for the novel because it's much of its early portions is set in Kashmir. Adam Aziz returns to Kashmir after his education in Germany. So Kashmir is an important locale for the book. 1951 to 52, we have the Congress Party winning India's first general elections under the leadership of Nehru, and you can see a photo of him on the slide there. Skipping ahead to 1962, India loses a brief war with China over the disputed Himalayan border. And again, this is something that will be significant to Selim for reasons that I don't yet want to reveal, but we will certainly see some snippets of this in the novel. 1964, death of Nehru. 1965, the Second Indo-Pak War over Kashmir. So again, this disputed territory, which is still disputed to this day, is very relevant to this particular book. 1966, Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, and that's her below Nehru on the slide, whom the novel calls the widow for reasons that will be revealed to you, she becomes prime minister. In 1971, we see the Third Indo-Pak War, again over disputed territory, but this time over the creation of Bangladesh, which was formerly East Pakistan, as an independent nation. 1974, India explodes its first nuclear device in an underground test, and this, of course, sets off the nuclear arms race between India and Pakistan that I referenced in last week's lecture. In 1975, Indira Gandhi declares a state of emergency after being found guilty of electoral malpractice. Between 1975 and 77, nearly 1,000 of Indira Gandhi's political opponents are imprisoned, and a program of compulsory birth control, which in some cases meant forced sterilization, was introduced. And this is a project that will become very, very important to the novel, and the novel will sort of climax with some of these events, not to reveal too much. 1977, Indira Gandhi's Congress Party loses India's general elections. And in 1980, Gandhi returns to power heading a Congress Party splinter group called Congress Indira. Now, as I said, Rushdie wrote the book, he finished writing it in 1980, and so what the novel does not yet know, and the event that's sort of on the horizon that Rushdie as an author doesn't yet know when he's writing in 1980, is that Indira Gandhi will be assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards in 1984. So things once again are about to change in India, changes on the horizon, and this is a pivotal historical event, the assassination of Indira Gandhi. It's actually an event that will be referenced in Zadie Smith's White Teeth, although somewhat tangentially, and it'll be somewhat of a sidebar, but I think we'll see the two novels coming together a little bit at this point. Now, in terms of genre, the novel falls under the category of magic realism, which essentially means that it blends the magical or the seemingly fantastic with elements of standard realist or naturalist writing. This means that the magical is accorded the same status as the real in the book, so magical events are incorporated seamlessly as part of the novel's reality. And if you've started reading the novel at all, you'll know exactly what I mean. We have these events that seem entirely believable alongside events that might seem initially to be preposterous. And Rushdie treats those events in exactly the same way. He puts them on the same footing. There's no sort of jarring switch between events that we know to be historically accurate and events that seem to come out of some realm of the fantastic or the magical. And I think that's one of the things that makes the book so interesting. The genre of magic realism destroys the line of demarcation between what seems real and what seems to be fantasy. And in doing so, I think it tries to make the point that what we imagine as real or empirical, objective or truthful is perhaps no less constructed or subjective or open to interpretation than magic. This assertion is extremely important to Midnight's Children. And I hope that we'll talk much more about it in our conversations over the next 2 weeks. Perhaps the relationship of story to history, or the notion of history as story. I'm hoping that these are topics that we'll come back to. To give a quick bit of background, the genre of magic realism first appeared in literature in Latin America in the 1940s and the 1950s, with authors like Jorge Borges and later Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Isabel Allende really developing the style. Rushdie is perhaps the most well-known practitioner of the style in the English-speaking world. Several of his novels take this form. Midnight's Children isn't the only one. Although I would point out that authors like Toni Morrison, for example, if you've read Beloved, often use magic realism quite fruitfully as well. I think the interesting thing about what I've just mentioned is that, by this description of the genre, you can tell that magic realism often adheres to or is taken up by post-colonial or, quote, minority writers and literatures. And I'm hoping we'll get to talk about why this might be the case throughout this week's e-discussion. Why would magic realism be fruitful for so-called peripheral writers, do you think? So something to ponder as you get into the novel a little bit. Okay, so what to do now? First of all, if you haven't already done so, finish reading books 1 and 2 of Midnight's Children. You'll also need this week to read the very, very short assigned essay from Salman Rushdie called Errata, or Unreliable Narration in Midnight's Children. I assign that because I think it's a very useful perspective that Rushdie offers us on the novel, and I really think the essay will help you with your textual analysis this week. As usual, go ahead and participate in our e-discussion throughout the week, contributing to our various forums. If you happen to have extra time, you might consider reading ahead into books 3 and 4 of the novel. I really hope that you're enjoying the book, and I hope that you're excited about continuing on with it, and I encourage you to do so this week if you have a bit of time. Again, Midnight's Children is one of the most important post-colonial texts ever written, so it's important that we read it, but I also hope you're having fun with the book. After next week, by the way, you'll have a 2-week break from reading, so you're also going to have a chance to catch your breath after you finish the novel, which will be nice. By the way, as I said at the very beginning of the lecture, there will be no new lecture on the novel next week because I don't think I'm going to need to provide any additional context at that point. We'll simply carry on with our conversations about the book in our new discussion forums next week on books 3 and 4 until spring break. So we have 2 full weeks to chat about Rushdie, and hopefully we'll be able to do him justice in that time. In any case, I can't wait to chat with you about the book in this week's discussion forum, and I hope you're having fun with the readings.